Cormac McCarthy was directly inspired by Leo Tolstoy in his exploration of free will in Blood Meridian. And early in his career, McCarthy was a big fan of Tolstoy and called him one of the gutsy writers. And I remember 16 years ago when I started to read Cormac McCarthy, and it was a slog. I was in high school and it was so hard. But by the time I had graduated, I had read all of his books. But around that time, I wanted to read all the classics. And so I picked up War and Peace and was like, okay, this is long, but I've read long books before. I am going to do this. And I absolutely failed. And then when I was 19 and was way too confident in myself intellectually and was partying all the time, I tried picking up War and Peace again. I was like, I can do this. And I failed and gave up again. And it wasn't until I was living in Las Vegas and working security for a methadone clinic for when the patients who were on heroin got a little bit too rowdy, and sometimes they did, that I finally had the peace and quiet, except in those rare instances when I had to do something, to read War and Peace. And Tolstoy is one of the authors I'm actually going to cover a lot more here on Right Conscious in 2024. And if you don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of Cormac McCarthy here on YouTube. I already have 150 videos on McCarthy. You can check those out in the playlist down below. And while you're down there, if you are interested, I have a Cormac McCarthy course with over 10 hours of content on McCarthy for only $5 a month if you want to support me and what I'm doing. And so when we look at Blood Meridian, though, one of the big questions is, are we violent by design? Are we inherently these crazy humans? And McCarthy really pushes this critique by showing that the Chihuahuans, the Comanches, and, the white people are all equally as violent and engaging in corruption. And he totally kills the romanticization of the Wild West and the noble savage and the peasant farmers in Mexico who don't do anything. And McCarthy says early on in the novel, quote, "Only now is the child finally divested of all that he has been. His origins are become remote, as is his destiny, and not again in all the world's turning will there be terrain so wild and barbarous to try whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will, or whether his own heart is another kind of clay." And if you're a little bit confused about what this quote means, the Corvet's at the end, right down here, when it says, whether the stuff of creation may be shaped to man's will. So do we have free will? Or whether his heart is not another kind of clay? Are we not moldable? Nurture versus nature, or cosmic divine intervention. And in War and Peace, Tolstoy takes more of a deterministic point of view and pushes against the great man theory, which he feels erroneously attributes, these great events in history to Napoleon, to Tsar Alexander. And when he's examining history, he's actually seeing that guys like Napoleon and Alexander are more constrained than you may think, that they are actually not functioning by their own free will, but under the control of the inextricable laws of movement. However, what's interesting is that McCarthy and Tolstoy come to an agreement with this weird sort of a compatibility between free will and determinism, because Andre, Natasha, and Pierre, and no spoilers here for War and Peace, showed though throughout the novel in these moments how they can, grow morally and, with their own free will in this very controlled external environment. And he shows that, he shows us how monumental it is. And that's how I really feel too. I think this is probably the accurate perception of this whole debate, is that, we do live in a very deterministic world, but in these small moments, there are chances in your life where you can make that push. And Tolstoy does a good job, almost like McCarthy does, by focusing on the low lives, right? People who maybe aren't the most aristocratic. And obviously in War and Peace, there we get everybody from common individuals to the nobility. And another interesting connection, before I kind of show McCarthy's notes and some more quotes, is that in War and Peace, Tolstoy kind of shows the lack of free will through all these major battles. There's all these massive things happening, and it feels like that with us in our life now. Can you and I really change the government or the economy? Seems like all these things are functioning invisibly behind us, and the push of culture and society and the masses are not up to us and can't be changed by one person. But McCarthy kind of gets this sense with his use of violence in novels that it seems like all these characters are screwed up. If you go to some of these areas in New Mexico or Knoxville, Tennessee, and in the weird, deep, dark South, that in this world, nothing can happen but violence. Nothing can happen but negativity. And you almost have to you're just wrapped up in it as a passive participant without free will. And we see these characters, for instance, in Suttree. No spoilers for Suttree, but the whole kind of point of Suttree is Suttree's trying to become independent. He's stuck in this world. He's been living there his whole life. His family has these major expectations on him. It's like a typical novel. It's a coming of age. Like he's trying to become something else. In The Passenger, Bobby's trying to become something else. In the Border trilogy, John Grady Cole and Billy Parham trying to become something else. Orchard Keeper, the same thing. One could say in No Country for Old Men, Sheriff Bell's trying to gain that back. Him and even Llewellyn, but really Sheriff Bell's trying to gain back some form of autonomy and control over reality. And what we know from McCarthy about Tolstoy is that in his Blood Meridian drafts, he wrote War and Peace, and then he said the last paragraph, the last parts of War and Peace, which in the epilogue, it's where Tolstoy just kind of goes on this big rant about history. And Tolstoy writes in this epilogue, looking at man as a subject of observation from any point of view, theological, historical, ethical, philosophical, we find a general law of necessity to which he is subject like everything existing. Looking at him from within ourselves, as what we are conscious of, we feel ourselves free. This is beautiful writing. This is fire, you guys. Like, if you could say, compatibility between free will and determinism, or you could write it like this, that if we use a framing of reality, if I put the pinpoint frame, the logic frame, not even the logic, the theological, the ethical, any of these frames onto reality, we feel these a priori laws, or these even just normal laws that are governing everything that's happening. But when I'm meditating on the self, when I view my own life, and this is kind of one of the human fallacies, it's like, I'm okay, but everyone else is not okay. Or I can do this, I can control this, and this is what leads to addiction and big egos and the inflation of the false self and all these other things. But I do myself feel free. I do. What is personal development? Like, what am I working on? As I'm trying to restore my dopamine and not participate in certain activities, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to feel more free because I am free. I'm not just this slave to my neurobiology and all these other things. Like, I can do better. There's this opportunity for me. But if you zoomed 50,000 feet outside of my life right now, you'd see okay, this guy, Ian Katanak, he's teaching every day. He's trying to do a good job of taking care of his family and his pets and his house and maintain order. But his dreams, his life is reliant on all these crazy things he doesn't even realize what's going on. Will the YouTube gods bless him? Will the audience lift him up? Or is he just going to continue into obscurity? Will he find the motivation, with the place? Will the weather and everything be aligned? Will his life and his family and his health, all these crazy consequential things? Will his car, my car's in the shop right now and it's going to be $2,000. And I thought it was going to be $200. I'm like, oh my God. But when I look at the scope of my responsibility and my goals and my dreams from the outside, it looks a lot more out of my control than when I'm in my own head right now. I'm like, I can control it all. I can do it. My big goal this year, this is going to sound crazy, you guys. I'm only at 10,000 subscribers right now, but I want to get to 100,000 this year. It sounds crazy, but I went from basically last year around this time, less than 1,000 subscribers. We're already at 10. So I'm like, we can just go all the way to the 100,000. Who knows? But in reality, I'm going to have to release probably 2,000 more videos to get to 100,000 subscribers. It sounds crazy. And I think I could do that, guys. How many days are left? 300 days left in the year. I can. Ian Katanak, he can do that. I just maybe need to start talking about myself in the third person to gain that motivation. The best way to feel in control when you're totally out of control from the external sense of point of view is to talk about yourself in the third person. Ian Katanak feels great right now. Anyway, and what's interesting about this kind of criticism or commentary on free will is that McCarthy participates in this a lot with his hyper rationality with his characters. And so when you look at Blood Meridian, we have Judge Holden, who is a hyper rationalist. In No Country for Old Men, we have Anton Chigurh, and with his coin flipping, that's the ultimate version of hyper reality. In Stella Maris and The Passenger, we see the detrimental effects of hyper rationality with Alicia Western. And for those people who feel that the road is about entropy, one could say that is, us losing free will and moving toward that space of determinism is the end goal of entropy in regards to the human race. And so what Tolstoy and McCarthy are really trying to show us is that there really is no answer, but the best thing that we can do is admit that we have no control, that these outside forces, we have no control, but within ourselves that we can feel free. And I probably think that this is the best prescription because you don't want to be a nihilist. You don't want to be like a little incel boy who, can't take charge of their own life or like make action happen in reality and be, oh, boo hoo hoo me, and be a victim all the time, because that's what that leads to. Even if you hold it together and like are doing okay, it has to lead to detachment if you believe you have no free will, or at least are faking it in your own heart. And people will say that frees you of responsibility. That should be a liberating thing. But maybe in the Eastern world, I know in the East with like the non-dualistic or the dualistic philosophies, and a lot of stuff in Buddhism, they talk about this, but I don't think a lot of our Western brains are primed for that mentality. And I'm sure there's long comments already being written. Like, this isn't my commentary and actual thoughts on free will versus determinism. Like, I'm not throwing my hat in the debate here, but rather just going off of their opinions, which I think are obviously very valid in terms of a thought out analysis. So let's look at McCarthy kind of employing this idea one more time. And this is from Blood Meridian. These four, the gypsies, crouched at the edge of the firelight among their strange chattels and watched how the ragged flames fled down the wind as if sucked by some maelstrom out there in the void, some vortex in that waste deposit to which man's transit and his reckonings alike lay abrogate. As if beyond will or fate, he and his beasts and his trappings moved both in card and in substance under the consignment to some third and other destiny. And what's so interesting about all this is that the title of this chapter where this quote takes place is called Teredum Quid, which translates to something related to two things, but distinct from both. And that's why at the end there, he says, under some consignment to some third and other destiny. And this is how you adapt philosophy, everyone. This is a masterclass right here of how to adapt philosophy and other writers' thinking into a piece of work, because you could just read this and kind of be like, okay, that's actually kind of fire, and like maybe you catch the free will versus determinism debate. But when you actually realize what's going on here, he's offering us this third path from Tolstoy with beautiful language, connecting back to the Gypsy Tarot card reading and kind of doing this foreshadowing and this building of energy. And if we want to do a little bit of analysis of this quote, there's a beautiful contrast here with maelstrom and flames, water and fire. And then we're sucked into the void. So we're in this void, a vortex. And this vortex basically is meaningless because it's lays abrogate, which is basically means evaded. His existence, the journey of his life and his reckonings, his belief are basically done away with. And because it's beyond will or fate, it's beyond free will or determinism, because he and his beasts, we could say either, obviously I don't think he's meaning his animals, his shadow and his possessions moved both in card, which is interesting back to the tarot, and in substance, which then we have a contrast there. So if we have beasts and maybe the shadow connecting to the tarot cards to this kind of destiny, then the possessions, and which are kind of the substances under consignment, they're under this new third and other destiny. And what's happening here is like, you could be like, okay, Ian, what the hell is going on? But this is the mystical experience. If you go out and you take a trip, you're not going to be able to really explain in language what the hell is going on. And that's the same thing here. Here I am trying to tell you guys, explain this third path to you, but there's really no way. It's a feeling. It's something that you discover. And I feel like this is kind of one of these basic intermediate realizations of mystical growth, of spiritual growth, which is the preparation for those moments where you actually get to enact free will, and then the detachment of control otherwise, because if you look at like Buddhism and stuff, all attachments lead to suffering, and that's absolutely true. And so if you have attachments to all these different things, and your life's going to, first of all, really suck, and then you're not going to have the energy or the focus to understand when you do need to move. Because I feel like we're given opportunities all the time to make to make quantum leaps in different fields in our life, and a lot of the time people are so unaware, just because of their phones or all these other things, that they never actually take that leap. They never wake up, and they miss it along the way. And as you get older, these leaps become smaller and smaller. And if you're a real piece of crap and exert your free will in such a negative manner all the time, then all these opportunities just dry up. And the chapter before this, McCarthy named it The Felon Wind, which was a reference to a Milton line that's discussing the role of fate in the loss of his good friend. And so once again, McCarthy is weaving these things in here, Blood Meridian is so much deeper than we could possibly imagine. We're just still trying to work this out, with all the palindromes and the mirroring going on. And then you have all these little things going on in here that, chapter 6 is just building up for chapter 7. Chapter seven's quiet exploration of free will and fate. And all this connects back to McCarthy being inspired about this discussion from a line by Milton in Lycidas. So now is your opportunity. Go crazy. Give me your whole free will versus determinism debate. You can talk about the third path. I would prefer that. But if you guys want to write 18 paragraphs discussing and debating just the actual debate, go ahead. I will read it all. If some people want to engage in the third way, that would be fun too, because that's actually where a lot of the growth happens, as I discussed. But maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm just a product of determinism, just blabbing into the mic.